Welcome, friends. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, continuing to cover the fallout from the U.S. decision to withdraw from the JCPOA, better known as the Iran nuclear deal, and the reimposition of sanctions on that country. You will have seen, I hope by now, some of my recent coverage of that. For example, my recent podcast episode, my interview on financial survival, my recent newsletter. But, of course, now the Trumpsters who have swallowed the Q Anon psyop wholesale and believe that, of course, the president is playing 67-dimensional pinochle and is 18 steps ahead of the game, so anything that he does is good by default. Or, as I say, they're coming out of the woodwork to say, well, obviously, if he's withdrawing from this deal, it must mean because Iran really is working on nuclear weapons, and this is part of draining the swamp or something, blah, blah, blah. For those in the reality-based community who are interested in the real fallout from this deal, however, that is pretty much encapsulated in this headline from Press TV, the Iranian news outlet, which I'm surprised to note you can still access freely online. Perhaps that part of the online crackdown isn't quite here yet, but I'm sure it's coming in the next few years. But anyway, for the time being, you can go to presstv.com and read that CNPC is set to replace Total in Iran gas project. For those not in the know, CNPC is the Chinese national petroleum company. Total is Total SA, the French oil and gas giant, and the Iran gas project relates to the South Pars natural gas field, by far the largest natural gas field in the world, still largely undeveloped, but that is changing. And here it says China's state-owned CNPC is set to take over a leading role held by Total in a huge gas project in Iran in case the French energy giant decides to quit amid U.S. sanctions against the Islamic Republic. The possibility of Total's pullout is quite high now, and in that scenario, CNPC will be ready to take it over fully, Reuters quoted a senior state oil official with knowledge of the contract as saying. So, for those who don't really grasp the significance of this at first glance, this is huge. As I say, the South Pars gas field is far and away the largest natural gas field in the world, and is still largely undeveloped. It is in the process of being developed. China has already sunk $20 million into just planning to develop the field, and they have a 30% stake in the field. Iranian national oil company Petropars has 19.9%, and Total has 50.1%, or they did, until the U.S. reimposed sanctions. And if Europe goes along with those sanctions, that means bye-bye that 50.1% stake to Total, and too bad. And CNPC is just going to take it over, and the Chinese are going to develop the South Pars field pretty much by themselves, and giving a little cut to Iran, obviously. So there you go. So that's a pretty significant thing. And this is, of course, all part of the fallout from this reimposition of sanctions. That is, if Europe goes along with the sanctions and just rolls over and says, yes, sir, to Uncle Sam. Who cares about our economic interests? We're just going to do whatever you say. So that, of course, is the still lingering question mark over this. But at any rate, China is set, is ready, is chomping at the bit, resource hungry and reserve rich as it is, to jump in and fill that void. They're certainly happy to do it. So for people who want to know more about this and what's happening right now, I did write about this in the most recent newsletter. The fate of the world is in the EU's hands, God help us all, because obviously I'm not taking sides here. I'm not saying yay EU or yay Iran or yay US. I mean, it has nothing to do with that. It's just an analysis of what is happening, and it really is a question of whether or not the EU is going to go along with these sanctions and what that means in either event. I mean, either the EU goes along with the sanctions and China jumps in to fill that void and gets strengthened geopolitically and economically as a result, or the EU has some backbone on this issue, does not go along with the sanctions, and Total continues along with this project, as well as some of the other Airbus and others that already have deals with Iran, will continue along with their economic development of that country, and basically stick a big middle finger to Uncle Sam and move closer to the Eurasian side of the geopolitical chessboard. And so either way, the U.S. is losing influence and power and political capital over this withdrawal, this unilateral, we're going to pull out despite the fact that there's absolutely no reason to pull out version of events. It's just basically a big shooting themselves in the foot, which, of course, is perfectly predictable. This is the perfectly predictable result of all of this. And that's why I think this is part of the engineered downfall of the West. We are moving towards the Eurasian 21st century, and this is part of it. And, of course, Of course, that's the other part of this. God help us all. As in, this isn't something we necessarily want. Oh, yay, someone's sticking up against the American Empire and against Uncle Sam. No, that's not really the way to read this, because of course, as you'll know if you're a longtime listener to the Corbett Report, episode 297, a seminal episode of my podcast, China and the New World Order, they're just another part of this false Hegelian dialectic that's being presented, phony opposition, the truth about the BRICS, the great decoupling, how the West is engineering its own downfall. I've been talking about this for years and years. All of these moves that are basically Uncle Sam shooting himself in the foot. Oh, would you look at that? It looks like China's going to benefit from us pulling out of this Iran deal. Who would have thunk it? Well, of course, the real engineers and the people who really know what's going on really do know how this is going to play out, and they really do want it. They want the rise of this multipolar world, the Cold War of the 21st century to take over from the phony Cold War of the 20th century. Again, more on that in all of the things that I've written and talked about so far, and more that I will talk about in the future. But to get up to date on the latest of these U.S. sanctions and what it means, the fate of the world is in the EU's hands. Please read that editorial and consider that in light of this recent news. I think some huge things are afoot, and the people who are just going along with God Emperor Trump and his 67-dimensional pinochle are not going to understand what is happening. You will understand if you are following CorbettReport.com, so please do so. Looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.
All a part of the plan. The poles of power are shifting from the United States to China. Most recently, the selection of Donald Trump and his nationalist policies set forth by his handler, Wilbur Ross, who helped negotiate his bailout from Rothschild Inc. in 91. These policies are being used to put distance between the United States and our military allies and our economic allies. Countries like Iran, Japan, Germany, France, just to name a few, either major allies, importers, exporters of oil, they've sided with China. China's finishing Iranian gas projects to connect their Silk Road.
And Trump is a Rothschild agent. Meet Wilbur Ross, who once bailed out Trump in Atlantic City and is now his pick for Commerce of Secretary. That's right, Wilbur Ross, Commerce Secretary. Do I have it saved? No. We'll do a Control F and Rothschild. Wilbur Ross, then an investment banker working for Rothschild Inc., helped the bondholders negotiate with Trump. Why did we make a deal with him, one asks? Ross insisted that Trump was worth saving. The Trump name is still very much an asset, he said. Trump is a frontman for Adelson and for this Jewish supremacist mafia. Look at this. Forward. Magazine, Jewish magazine. In 100 days, a new Jewish elite rises under Trump. Does that sound like America First? Here's reports. This is Jewish Press. Reports. The Trump family donated bigly to Jewish Israeli causes. This is dangerous stuff, guys. At Adelson, Trump's biggest campaign contributor, known as the Kingmaker in the New Yorker. Sheldon Adelson, Time Magazine. All Israel, all the time. The Guardian, Sheldon Adelson backs Trump trip to Israel after $100 million pledge, his biggest financier. Jerusalem Post, last minute, Adelson flushes Trump campaign with cash. This is not Israel first, guys. This is Israel first, not America. Sheldon Adelson gave record $5 million for Trump inauguration. Alex Jones and the controlled kosher conservatives all play it off like Trump is some independent billionaire. He's controlled and owes his whole life to this Rothschild banking dynasty. Adelson gave record $5 million for Trump inauguration, got to sit right behind him. This is his puppet. Adelson furious over Trump waffling on Jerusalem embassy move. So this embassy move is all for Adelson and the Zionist Organization of America. Haaretz, Sheldon Adelson offers to help pay for the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Very disturbing, guys. This is what it is. It's not America first. So this is the Jerusalem Post. Israel and the New World, unexpected New World Order. Geographically, Israel is just off center. Why then is it treated with such respect, especially by the likes of Russia and China? In the new and surprising economic world order, Israel could gain a degree of wealth not seen since the days of King Solomon. That's back when the Second Temple was around. It says, as for Israel, how is that this small country, a mere sliver of land, is accorded such deference? The world's only Jewish state is making deals with Turkey, Russia, China, in spite of their alliances with Iran. which is dedicated to Israel's annihilation. Why is Jerusalem pursuing such deals, and ambivalent at best about Israel? Why are these nations agreeing to them? A new world order difficult for the West to recognize answers many of these questions. The project, this is how Israel is going to take over the world with trade and technology. The project is called the Belt and Road Initiative. Unveiled only 4 days ago, it will take an estimated $7.5 trillion to develop, but the benefit is nothing less than an explosion of prosperity, not just for participating countries, but for the whole world. No less than 75 nations have joined the Silk Road Chamber of International Commerce. So it's two parts. It's technology and it's trade. Members include all of the Eastern Goliaths: China, Russia, India, the BRICS, and but here's the part. Most importantly, Israel is positioned to guard the world's internet. Everything today is traded, controlled, and administered online. And Israel is emerging as the world's #1 guardian of the World Wide Web. This means regardless of being a few miles off track from China's land and maritime roads, it is positioned to be the center of both belts, trade and finance, and the internet. Economists worry that China's ambition could trigger a global economic collapse, remember that, a currency collapse specifically. Maybe BRICS and One Belt Road don't care. A global currency collapse might be seen as a way to wipe the slate clean of nation-based currencies. We've been hearing about the one world currency, global currency for a long time. That's like the pillar of the New World Order, Jewish end times, Judeo-Christian end times conspiracy. So wipe the slate clean of nation-based currencies, especially the US dollar, and establish an international one like Bitcoin, perhaps. If Bitcoin is the model for a new internet-based global currency, Israel is likely to be its guardian too, protecting that currency from hackers around the world. You heard that right. Israel in charge of all finance. As chief of security of the world's information and currency, and with energy dependence, Israel stands to gain substantial wealth. So this is from Jerusalem Post, July 2017, Israel and the Unexpected New World Order.
Have a look at this one. In Beijing, Netanyahu looks to marry Israel's technology with China's capacity. You can't make this stuff up. Go and read it. I'm not going to read it. Go and read it. Basically, they're bragging massive technology transfers to China. Remember Alex Jones? The Communist Chinese. We're going to fight the Communist Chinese. Well, Alex, your best mate, Donald Trump, is in bed with Netanyahu, who's in bed with Putin, who's in bed with Communist China. How do you work that one out? How little has changed. Consider the fascinating perspective of Russian Jewish oligarch Boris Berezovsky, once the most powerful of the Russian oligarchs and the puppet master behind President Boris Yeltsin during the late 1990s. After looting billions in national wealth and elevating Vladimir Putin to the presidency, he overreached himself and eventually went into exile. According to the New York Times, he had planned to transform Russia into a fake two-party state, one social democratic and one neoconservative, in which heated public battles would be fought on divisive, symbolic issues, while behind the scenes both parties would actually be controlled by the same ruling elites. With the citizenry thus permanently divided and popular dissatisfaction safely channeled into meaningless dead ends, Russia's rulers could maintain unlimited wealth and power for themselves with little threat to their reign. It's a formula taken to new heights in the lead up to the US midterm elections of 2018 and the theatrical circus of the Donald and Hillary show. While spectacular in its never-ending allegations against the incumbent president, apparently under siege in the White House, the Don is allegedly creating domestic and foreign policy one midnight tweet at a time in between burgers and Diet Coke, but perhaps the more astute observer senses that behind the lights and stage smoke, a more sinister show goes on out of sight of the average observer. This documentary shines a light in that direction and takes the view that to understand the present, we must understand the past and go back over the distant facts and figures to get a sense of future directions. This emerging narrative posits that while shadowboxing fills the stage in Washington, D.C., a certain English gentleman, known as Lord Jacob Rothschild, head of the most powerful banking dynasty in the world, is busy building his personal project spanning the Eurasian continent, the Belt and Road Initiative, formerly known as One Belt, One Road. This massive infrastructure project was supposedly postulated in 2013 as a way to stimulate the world economy and lift Asia out of poverty. But it is in fact a central core plan, years in the making, setting up the Rothschild, City of London, East India Trading Company, New World Order economic system. The estimated cost is over $20 trillion through till 2030. China is where the spotlight is shone as the driving force, but Israel is the real centre of attention. This is the Bunting Cloverleaf Map. It is found within the Iran-Lahore map collection in the National Library of Israel in Jerusalem. A mosaic model of the map is installed on the fence of Safra Square at the site of Jerusalem City Hall. Jerusalem is in the centre of the map, surrounded by the three continents of Asia, Europe and Africa, comprising three leaves of a clover shape. The top right leaf shape, coloured in green, represents Asia. The top left one, coloured in red, represents Europe, and the bottom one, coloured in yellow, represents Africa. The three continents include captions of their various countries and illustrations of some of their cities. This map was drawn in 1581, depicting Jerusalem at the centre of the great pan-Eurasian trading routes, and this is exactly what the current-day Belt and Road Initiative seeks to establish, making Jerusalem and the long biblically prophesied Greater Israel the centre of trade, politics and culture, replacing the United States as the world's leading light and the human race's bright, shining destiny. North America is depicted in part off to the side, labelled the New World, a seeming unrelated sideshow to the main game of dominating the Eurasian landmass, certainly true of the 1600s and ironically ever truer in the year 2018. In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski published his seminal work, The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and its Geostrategic Imperatives. Brzezinski had a distinguished career as Professor of American Policy at Johns Hopkins University before becoming the United States National Security Advisor during 1977 to 1981 under the administration of President Jimmy Carter. In his book, Brzezinski notes, Eurasia is thus the chessboard in which the struggle for global primacy continues to be played, and that struggle involves geostrategy, the strategic management of geopolitical interests. It is noteworthy that as recently as 1940, two aspirants to global power, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, agreed explicitly in the secret negotiations of November of that year that America should be excluded from Eurasia. Each realised that the injection of American power into Eurasia would preclude his ambitions regarding global domination. Each shared the assumption that Eurasia is the centre of the world and that he who controls Eurasia controls the world. Halford John Mackinder in 1904 stated the same with his Heartland theory and his paper The Geographical Pivot of History, where he surmised his work in the interesting year of 1919. Who rules East Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world. And so, in the present day, after two devastating wars based in Europe and Russia, and a Cold War spanning the globe, we see an unfolding battle to control the Eurasian landmass and put Jerusalem at the centre of a new world order. The future Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, stated in 1924 after visiting the Soviet Union, quote, "I'm a Bolshevik."